What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Always Andy. Today we're going to be setting up our solar system. So follow me along in the video, and our first step is going to be setting up our panels to see what we have. Let's head outside and let's get these set up. All right, so we got all the panels laid out, and with all these ones out here, that makes a total of 7 that we have. Now, of course, there's always 6 sitting right here. I've got one more that's already set up. Basically, what I want to do is I want to make sure every one of these panels is clean, that everything on here is working, that all the connections are tight, and then for the MC4 connectors that are on here, I want to make sure all these connectors look good. I'd like to do what I can in order to get the most amount of available power that they have. I'd like to be able to get as much as we can. It shows these are rated for 180 watts, and of course that's in peak conditions. So some of these MC4 connectors that are on here are kind of nasty. Some of these things have been kind of outside for years. So we're gonna do, and some of these are also kind of broken on the ends as well. So I've got a whole kit of these, so we're gonna replace all these ends. We're gonna open each one of these up for the little box. And we're gonna make sure that all of this stuff looks good inside of here. There's no corrosion, everything's tight, and everything looks good before we put these into service. Let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, so now we're out in the garage and we need to begin building the battery boxes for our cells. So we have some plywood we're going to be using to make the boxes. I've got a couple of these pieces already cut. They still need to get glued, cleaned up, and sanded, and ready to hold the cells. The cells we're using, of course, are the 48 volt CALB cells that we're going to be using on here. These cells are 3.2 volts at 180 amp hours. The goal here is to make a box that's going to be able to hold 8 of these in a row, and then we'll have those wired up in series to the other 8, making a total of 16, which will get us to the 48 volts that we need in order to power our 48 volt system. So let's start making the boxes. We'll get these going and we'll see how much we can get done. Let's get to it. Alright guys, and just like that, our first box is built. Of course, this is housing 8 of our cells, like we said earlier, so I need to replicate this box and build an additional one to hold our other 8 cells. It's also notable to mention that this is a 9 kilowatt pack after we have all 16 of these together. So let's go ahead and replicate this box. Let's get it done one more time. We'll get the other cells in there, and then we'll go ahead and get this box cleaned up and get it ready to get screwed together. Alright, I should also mention that I left a small gap here on this box as well. And this small gap right here is how we're going to screw one side into the rest of the box, which is going to put just the slightest amount of tension onto the battery cells in order to prevent swelling of these cells. So we've got all this stuff cut. What I want to do now is I want to go through and I want to sand all of our edges and make them all nice and smooth. And any cracks that are in here, I'm going to glue those together. Then we'll hit it again with a final sand with a lighter sandpaper. We'll get these boxes built and we'll get them screwed together. Let's do it. All right, I think this is a pretty good example of one of the things we're going to be gluing. This knot has a pretty good recess in it, And I'd like that recess kind of filled, and then there's a void on here. This void goes pretty far into here, so I want to make sure that that's filled before we go to use this. I don't want any like softer, weaker spots that we have on here. So we're going to fill this up with glue, we're going to set it out to dry, and then we'll resand this one afterwards. All right guys, so we just got all the panels laid out in the yard. Let's go ahead and check the voltage of each one of these and make sure everything's working correctly. 40 volts, right at 40. 39.93, 39.91, 39.78, and 39.78. Yeah, this one shows 40.50, 27. So this one's at 27. The rest are all at about 40. All right guys, now that we got our voltages measured and we're sure our panels are all working correctly, let's go ahead and get these connected to our PV extension cord and let's get this thing ran in for the MC4 connectors. All right guys, all 7 of our panels together are a total of 20 feet long. So we're gonna build a quick jumper harness to go between these with the MC4 connectors from the first panel to the last panel. That way our extension cord can be the same length when it plugs into the end. And just like that, our MC4 solar extension cord jumper harness is complete. One end of this is going to plug into the panel coming off on the far end. We'll run this side all the way behind all the other panels, and that'll intercept our actual cabling that we have to bring the power all the way back up to our inverter. Let's go get all this plugged in now. All right, so the time has finally come to be able to wire up the batteries. So this is a total of about 9 kilowatts, and the plan here is to take all 16 of them and wire them in series. So I'm gonna be using these on here, and this is how we're gonna do this. Basically, I have my main negative out, and I have my main positive out on the other side. So what I'd like to do on here is every one of these needs to get connected across. So it'll be negative to positive, positive to negative, negative to positive, positive to negative, all the way across. We'll do that. We'll run one cable across the back, and then we'll wire the other side up as well. And then once that's finished up on there, we'll have 2 main leads, one negative, one positive coming out of this. That'll go to our BMS, and we'll talk about the BMS here in a second once we get this portion done. All right guys, next step is we're gonna keep working on the BMS here. So, one of the other clips, you saw where I wired this thing up. Now when I put terminal rings on the end of this, we're gonna get this thing wired up on here. We're gonna go our B negative is gonna go to the main negative on the battery, which is this one right here. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna bolt all that together now, that way that's connected. So let's do that real quick. All right, that's done. We've got that bolted together. Now let's go ahead and take the other side of the BMS, the other side of the negative. This is gonna go to power negative, which of course is up to the inverter itself. So we're gonna take these two, we're gonna bolt that together up to a piece of wire we need to make that goes from here in through this hole out of the top, and we're gonna connect that directly to the negative side on our inverter. Let's go ahead and set that up now. And actually I almost forgot, before we connect that, we need to put our shunt in line, which is our Bluetooth battery monitor system. So we're gonna go ahead and install this as well, and we're gonna get that in line coming off of our main negative, and then we'll have that go down to the negative side from our BMS. So let's go ahead and install this real quick. Okay, so the shunt looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and build a piece of wire to go from the shunt through our hole and down to the BMS real quick. And just like that, our cable's now made. So let's go ahead and get this onto the BMS on one side and onto the shunt on the other. Let's do it. All right guys, so we just got some bus bars in. We're gonna go ahead and get these installed now, and we're gonna have everything connected directly to these, and then we may even use these covers provided to be able to cover these up. Let's go ahead and get those mounted. All right, let's talk about the shunt for a second. In order for our display screen to be able to come on, we have to have a signal going to this that's not only connected from our ground side, but also to the power side. On here, there's a section that says Victor Sierra November Sierra, which is VSNS. This one has to have a power wire going to it. So what I want to do is from our little power side on here, we're gonna remove this little screw, we're gonna tighten this end in and clamp it inside of there, then the other end of this is gonna go to our main power that's going from the inverter. And maybe we'll do something like this to kind of tuck this more out of the way. I think it's a little less obvious that it's there. Next thing we're going to do on here is we're going to connect our main ground that's going from the battery negative, from the BMS, onto our negative side bus bar. So the last thing we need to do on here is we need to connect our positive cable from the battery and then energize the capacitors inside of the inverter and then connect the other side of it to our main positive bus bar. Let's go ahead and knock that out. We connected our main positive battery cable coming off of the bus bar, and then we took one end of this and I took it down here to the battery setup. What I did was I touched it on the positive side of each one of these on one side of the bank near the main battery negative. And what that did was that energized the capacitors inside of the inverter. So what I did was I started with one and I just kind of worked my way down here, increasing it 3 volts at a time, increasing the voltage, came all the way up the other side until I got to our main battery positive cable, and then I went ahead and I connected it onto there. What that did is that prevented a large spark from happening or from occurring when initially connecting our main battery positive cable to the battery, thus, like I said, energizing the capacitors inside of the inverter. As soon as that happened, of course, it immediately turned on our screen here, which is now up and running. The only other thing I've done on here is I went ahead and I connected our solar to our solar input. Now, in order to show you guys what this thing actually looks like now, let's go ahead and kick the solar on. When you kick the solar on at the main fuse, that turns on the inverter. So the inverter is now running. This thing will take a few seconds to go ahead and start up. Boom. So now the inverter is actually on and running. And what it's showing on here is that it's actually charging. So you get a flashing light on the charging side. This one just shows that it's actually charging. And it shows you have from MPPT, you have the actual solar panels converted from DC to DC, going into the batteries from the solar panels and charging the actual batteries, and it shows it's charging. We're hooked up currently on our PV2 input on the left side. So if you click down, we can go through our selection setting on here and actually see what we're making. So we click down, that's PV1, 0 volts, PV1, 0 amps, PV1, 0 watts, PV2, we're making 90 volts at 0.3 amps. There's a total of 30 watts of solar coming in from all of our panels. Now obviously 30 watts, that's trash. That's obviously that's not very impressive. Now the actual unit itself is using probably 100 watts just to be on and running right now. So making 30 watts of solar is not, that's not anything to write home about. That's not impressive at all. But looking outside at our current weather conditions, it's extremely cloudy, it's going to rain today, and this is not a good day for actually making solar. Let's go take a look at our panels real quick and just see how they look. All right, so here's our panels. They're out here in the backyard. Everyone's posted up out here. We have all 7 of our panels out here, all wired in series together. We have our main positive, which is coming off the one on the far right, our main negative, which is coming off the one on the far left, and all those are connected. I guess Mike is gonna go check them out. And all those out here are connected together in series, which is where we're getting our wattage from. Which leads me to my next point. The next part of this we're actually gonna cover. When we're trying to connect our solar on here and we're running this, we can't produce enough wattage on here running our solar to charge our batteries, then we need another way of being able to charge our batteries. We'll get into this one a little later. We'll kind of go over this in more detail and show you guys what all this screen's actually showing. But right now, what it's showing on here, the most important part, is the blue line is that it's pulling watts out of the battery. It's pulling 63 watts out of it in order to run the inverter. So our 63 watts that it's pulling out of it, plus the 32 watts that's actually coming in, is 95 watts, so 94 watts. That's what the inverter is actually using. We can't charge our battery system like this. So we can't actually charge our battery system like this. So the question is, when there's no sun out, we're not producing any solar, how do we charge the batteries? Our next step is going to be using an inverter style generator that we're gonna use to charge the batteries whenever the sun's not out. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a 25-foot long 12-gauge extension cord, and we're gonna wire this up inside of the inverter. I'm gonna show you guys how to do that real quick. And then whenever we have a cloudy day, or it's nighttime, or it's raining, or we just need to top up the batteries, we can pull the inverter generator out, run this thing, and we'll use the inverter generator to charge our battery bank. So let's go ahead and set that up now. All right, so the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn the inverter off by turning off the solar input going to the inverter. That'll put the inverter back into an off stage, so we'll be able to work on this. So we'll give that a second to turn off. The next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna prep our extension cord. So this is a 25-foot long 12-gauge extension cord, and the 12-gauge wiring is good to 15 amps up to 100 feet. So let's go ahead and set this one up real quick. Now, of course, this has 2 ends on it. You got the male end, you got the female end. We're gonna be keeping the male end on here because we're gonna be plugging that into our 50-foot extension cord. They're gonna be running into the generator. So we're gonna leave the male end on here. On the female end, this is the one we're gonna cut off. And in case we decide we need this for something, we're gonna go ahead and leave a couple inches on here. Just like that. And then we're gonna take back some of the sheathing on here a little bit. And then each one of these needs to get stripped back a little bit so we can run this inside of here. We're gonna go ahead and take these and we're gonna get these installed inside of the actual inverter itself. So let's do that real quick. So there's a couple screws that hold this in place. We're gonna go ahead and remove those now. All right, and just like that, our little cover comes off. We'll set this out of the way. So let's go ahead and get this wired up real quick. Our extension cord has 3 wires coming out of it. We have our green, which is our ground, the black, which is our live, and our white, which is the neutral. This is also labeled. It shows on the far right side, N, which is our neutral, L, which is our live, or hot, and then of course the ground on the far left side. So let's wire this in real quick. Start with our ground that's on the far end. We'll do the live, which is in the middle. And we'll put our neutral, which is on the end. Give everything a good pull. Make sure nothing's gonna come out of here. So let's go ahead and get the inverter cover back on, then we'll kick it on, and then we'll turn the machine on using solar, and then we'll plug in our generator and we'll see what it's doing. Let's go ahead and power the system back on by turning in the solar input. Okay. It looks like we're actually making 270 watts, 280 watts of power from the solar panels outside, so that's cool. Let's check our weather condition real quick. Looks like it's 1% more sunny outside now than it was. So, got a little gap in the clouds here. Okay. With that, we're making almost 300 watts of power, and what's actually going into the batteries is displayed just below that. So on our display unit here, it shows, earlier it was blue showing we were using it, now the arrow is red going toward it. So this red arrow on here is showing that we're actually putting energy into the batteries. 240 watts is what we're actually making from the panels. After energy loss and use from the inverter, we're actually putting 126 watts into the batteries. So, though 126 watts isn't a whole lot of energy, at least we're putting energy into the batteries now instead of just using it. So, go ahead and get our generator outside, and let's see if we can start producing more power using that as opposed to just using the solar panels. Let's do that. Go ahead, we've got our generator running outside. Let's go ahead and plug in our AC input line, and let's see what happens, see if we can produce any power out of this. So, the display screen is now showing we have 123 volts of AC input, and it's showing that we're charging the batteries at 356 watts. So now it's charging with our AC input, and it's also charging with our solar panels as well. We have a total of 360 watts coming into the batteries. I just heard the fans kick on. I see the sun starting to come outside as well now a little bit, and it looks like our total wattage input right now is right about 500 watts. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and I've hooked up a watt meter in line on our extension cords here so we can measure the amount of wattage we're actually pulling out of the generator. Right now it shows we're pulling about 80 watts out of it. Let's go ahead and turn up the current pull on the inverter, and let's see if we can pull a few more watts out of the generator. That generator is rated at 2,000 peak and 1,500 watts running, and we're pulling less than 100, so let's turn this up a little bit. Holding the down button for 3 seconds brings us into the setting display menu. If we hit down twice, the book tells us this is our maximum current charging. Let's go ahead and turn this up one. Oh. We're going to turn this up to 20 amps. Inside of our book, we're going to go into setting number 11, and we're going to turn up our maximum utility charging current. It's setting number 11, so we hold the bottom arrow for 3 seconds. It brings us into our settings menu. We scroll down until we get to setting number 11. Currently it's set at 10 amps. Hit the button. Let's see if we can turn that up a little bit to 20 amps. Hit escape, and let's see what that does. Alright, so it took a little searching through the instructions, but I managed to figure it out. We have setting number 16 inside of the book on here shows, says to configure charger source priority. This is the one that it's supposed to be set to default, but for some reason it was not, and it says solar energy and utility will charge battery at the same time, and that's the setting that I was missing on here. It was set to, it says solar energy will charge the battery as first priority, utility will charge the battery only when solar energy is not available. Currently I have a very limited amount of solar coming in. Now it looks like the sun is starting to come out a little bit. So the sky condition here. We've got a little bit of patchiness going on, a little bit of sun coming in. At the moment, it looks like we're pulling in 262 watts out of the panels, okay, 259 watts out of the panels, and then I also have the generator hooked up, And with the generator, I have it set at 10 amps, which is giving us a total of 705 watts out of the generator. So, after the inverter uses what it needs, plus the solar panels from outside from the sun, and the generator pulling its power in, we're charging into the batteries right at about 800 watts. So we're gonna continue to let this charge on here and continue charging the solar, or our battery bank, and as soon as it's fully charged, then we'll reset our battery meter on here. So let's let this charge up for a little while and we'll come back to it.